Okay, so what if we've had a long time unhealthy boundary setting history, and now our boundaries are just a complete mess around a certain domain of our life, and we need to do some cleaning up because it may, well, actually, what I appreciated about your workbook is that you had us go through different relationships. Like, what's your relationship with your sister like? Is it a porous boundary? Is it a rigid boundary or is it a healthy boundary? How about your relationships at work? And you went through all these different domains to look at different people in our lives and what our boundaries look like. And some of those people or domains may be a complete mess. So when we've had that patterning, what's your approach to the cleanup? Like, how do we get the ball rolling in the right direction?
What's one thing you can do? What is one thing you can do in the relationship with your sister, your partner, your mother? Often we think that we have to make this huge overhaul, we have to remodel the whole relationship when it could be simply saying one thing. One thing can change a lot. And once you can consistently stick to that one thing, then you can add the other things on. But what's a thing you can do today? When your mom calls and she says something about you gaining weight, what will you say this time? What will be different?
Keeping it small to just one thing and then
Very
trying it out.
small.
Mhm. And then that creates the probably the courage and the strength to do that one thing like 10 times and then maybe
Mhm.
add on another one thing. So when what I notice, I err on the side of porous boundaries, not rigid. And except for in the domains of work, I have pretty good boundaries with my work. But when I'm talking about like my friendships or my family members, I tend to be a little bit porous. And I'm curious about like the common signs and symptoms of people that when they're not in a place with healthy boundaries, what it starts to look like. How can you tell if you need some reorienting around boundary work?
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
What are the problems you see with porous boundaries?
With porous boundaries, what I tend to do is I give more of my time than I have. I override my body's signaling of like, I'm done now.
Mhm.
I need to leave now. I That doesn't work for me. I don't want to go to that event or whatever. And as a result, it lends me to, I think,
Mhm.
physical depletion. Or, even we were talking about houseplants earlier. When my garden is a mess, it's because I'm not spending enough time taking care of like sort of that me time because I'm giving it to
Mhm.
someone else. So that's where
Mm.
the consequences of the porous boundaries are.
Mm. I would agree there that with porous boundaries, there tends to be a lot of self neglect, lots of burnout, resentment. And when you're at the opposite end of that with rigid boundaries, there's a lot of loneliness because you haven't let people in enough. And with porous boundaries, you've let people in too much. So getting to that healthy space is figuring out some sort of healthy middle ground for yes, I can, no, I can't.
Mhm. How do you do that for yourself? I mean, you offer a lot of yourself to the world. You're writing a lot. You have a therapy practice. You're a mom. Where do you lie in that spectrum of porous versus rigid and your own self care?
I'm trying to think of how to think of this. I think I'm mostly healthy with a little bit of rigid. I probably say no before I say yes. Like sometimes my team will say, "Do you no?" And then they'll tell me what it is. I'm like, oh, "Okay, yeah, 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 yeah." So I err on no more than yes because I do realize the limited amount of time, capacity, and energy that I have. I am a mother of two. As soon as I finish this interview, my children will be home. So I'm on to, something else. So I use no quite a bit. Um, And I think the people in my life know that when I say yes, I really, really mean it. I'm
Mm.
enthusiastic about it. It is a sign that I am all into it. I jump in to help people, but I do it in ways that work for me. I cannot be committed to maybe a weekly commitment, but I can step in occasionally. So I've learned my limits through saying yes too much. Um, because I am in so many spaces, people have a lot of requests. And there was a time when I would be so mad at strangers and why are they asking me this? Don't they know I'm a mom and I have this? And I had to say, Nedra, they don't know. You know that. You know what your calendar looks like. You know what you have to do when you get off of work. You know when you need to wash your hair. You know all of those things. They don't know. And so, because they don't know, you will have to tell them that you're not available. You cannot do it, and not be mad at folks for asking, because it makes sense that they would ask. They don't know your capacity. I am the person with the calendar and with, many balls in the air, and I have had to learn to say no and not overcommit. I would say mostly it's healthy, and sometimes I can be a bit rigid around, not taking on new opportunities because I don't want to burn out. I really love the space I'm in, and I try to protect it, so much so that I might say no a bit too much.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm on the other end of the spectrum of saying yes a bit too much. So when I say no, someone's like, "Oh wow, she means no." She is saying no. So I love that when you say yes, people are it's like, "Oh yeah, I get it. Nedra really wants this. It's important to her enough to say yes." And maybe we all maybe lean a little bit more on a tendency to say no or a tendency to say yes, and it's good to get flexible and trying out the other side and see our patterning around that. Which, I think as a parent that is so important because what you're talking about there is no one knows but you what
Hmm.
your limits are, what your schedule looks like, whether you're hungry or not, when you ate lunch or if you ate lunch. And if you're getting mad at everyone else that, they're scheduling something during lunchtime, you're the one that put that on your schedule. Uh,
Hmm.
but that's also part of our parenting of our kids is helping them listen to their own limits and their boundaries, and part of their safety in the world is learning how to do that. How have you done that with your girls?
My kids are so emotionally connected sometimes that it's scary. They say things that I never would have thought of saying at their age. Just, I don't like the way she made me feel. And I'm like, what? Whoa, what language? It's a beautiful thing. And they do tell me, about what they like and don't like about, what happened to them, their day, maybe something I said. And that is very helpful because it helps me to understand that they too have boundaries. They're kids, but they have boundaries and they want to be, spoken to a certain way, or they do or don't want to do certain things. So it's important for parents to remember that kids have a voice. Now, kids don't have discernment, they can't see ahead. So yesterday, my kids were doing something, I can't remember what it was. And they got a hole in their my daughter got a hole in her stockings. And I told her, I said, change those stockings, put on some leggings. And I said, do you know how I knew you would get that hole in there? She said, how? I said, I used to be a kid too. And I know that when you play, you're gonna mess your stockings up. Can you believe it? I used to be your age. So just allowing them to figure it out, because that could have been a moment where I said, no, you have to change your clothes. But I think she gets the understanding of, oh, wow, that makes sense to me now. If I wear these stockings while I'm outside playing, they aren't thick enough. Me saying that to her, she didn't get it. And so it's like, you know what? some of my boundaries with parenting is allowing my kids to figure out the things that they need to figure out. Some things are very important, and I'm like, no, no, I've decided for you. But there are many things, it's like, I think you maybe need to figure this one out because it will stick with you a bit better than me just telling you what this thing is. So with kids, I think honoring their boundaries really looks like listening to their needs, their requests, and allowing them to use that feeling language to explore what it means to think differently, to have a different opinion, to speak up. The funny thing is, I am really comfortable with that. And my work as a parent is to advocate for them having their voice with other adults.
Yeah. Other adults often don't like it, of this, this type of exploration of what happened to your stockings, because, it's interesting. If we allow a little bit more voice for our children to say, "This is how I feel," or "This is what's happening for me," it kinda makes us uncomfortable. I think as parents, we just wanna, like, fix it and put them in their spot.
Mhm.
Um, last night, my child was upset before bed about his brother and dad had gone on a baseball tournament. I got 2 boys, so we're about baseball, keeping our baseball pants white, not stockings. But, they'd gone on a baseball tournament, and they'd come back, and my child was feeling really left out, and he was in a place of, "It's not fair."
Mhm.
And when kids get into a place of, "It's not fair," I think the instinct of the parent is to be like, "Life is not fair, kid." You know? And actually what he needed was to just
You're
cry
right.
and tell me, yeah, like,
Mhm.
tell me about what feels not fair to you, because
Mhm.
you feel like dad got your brother got to do this thing with dad, and you had to stick with mom, and mom's kinda not as fun sometimes as dad is. And he needed to say what was not fair, but we swoop in so quickly to fix the feeling or tell the child what they're feeling is wrong and
Mhm.
correct, that I think that does lead to them not trusting their own feelings inside their own body or be able to express them. So then
Mhm.
later on down the road, it's like, I'm not gonna say this isn't fair. I'm just gonna keep quiet and not set my limit. I have some questions for you from our listeners. Big one right now is politics and family. So boundaries
Mhm.
around that. It actually really has been quite divisive within families where maybe, I don't know, 5 years ago, people could tolerate if a family member has a different political view, but more recently, it's like, "Oh, if you have that political view, I can't hang with you at all." Like, I can't, it's
Mm.
so painful to be in your presence. So, how do you work with that when there's just real divisiveness around, like, core belief systems, even amongst people that love each other?
I think there are so many things that we can talk about in families. Why does politics have to be one of them? I wonder if are we looking for a fight? Are we trying to confront some issues? Are there other ways to be in community with people without talking about politics? I have an uncle, and when he brings up politics, I say, "Oh, I don't watch the news," and he moves on, and then he'll talk about his neighbors not pulling their trash bin up. I'll talk about that. I don't want to hear about every terrible thing you've seen on the news. I don't.
Yeah.
So how do we let people know that I want to be in this relationship with you, but for us, this is a off limit topic because we don't see eye to eye. And I don't want to continue to have these divisive conversations. I wonder why we allow them to continue because there are so many things to talk about other than politics. Clearly, there are because we just started talking about it 5 years ago. You just said that.
Mhm.
So, for years, we've been talking about other things. So,
Right.
how do we go back to that? I do think that what happens with politics is we start to see a person's belief system and we're like, oh my gosh, are you racist? Are you like not in support of women's rights? Like, what are you saying here? And with politics, it could be so complicated. People will hang their hat on, oh, no, no, no. I only like him for student loans. Oh, no, 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 no. I just like him because, whatever the thing is. And we will make it our mission to tell them all these other things they shouldn't like, when in actuality, Thanksgiving dinner is not the opportunity to change minds. It is the time to connect. So, how do we connect with our family members who have these different beliefs? And for those who we don't want to be in relationship with, how do we leave those relationships because of their beliefs? Because our job is not to change who they are in this setting, it's either to accept them or not.
I think that's perfect. The 2 things I wanna highlight that you did there. One was you said, "Oh, I don't watch the news," or, "I'm not interested in that." You sort of you made it light without having to go into, like, the hard, like, "I do not speak with about politics with you. I want to remind you of that." You didn't make it like the serious thing. You sort of, in that sort of a situation where it's like you do a soft little boundary to kinda deflect and move on. "Let's talk about the trash cans." And the other aspect of it is that you're not going into the relationship with the agenda of changing someone. I think that's why
Hmm.
we want to talk about politics with other people is we want to change their minds. We want to convince them that we are right and they are wrong and we're passionate about it because we care deeply about it. But the one guarantee is if you go in with that agenda, you're more likely to hear their side get amplified.
Hmm.
And we know this as therapists all the time. You worked in a detox. If you try and change someone's mind about their use, they're more likely to argue why using is a good thing. So uh, I think that's really skilled and nuanced is dropping the rope and letting go a little bit on that agenda, but then also in some ways, if you're talking about pulling up the trash cans, you're connecting with this person and you're more likely to find similarities with them. We all have neighbors that we struggle with sometimes.
And my uncle loves to talk about politics. I'm
Mm,
like, I constant. It's something that I have to repeat. I'm fine with it
yeah.
because I enjoy the conversations with him. But I don't want to hear about the most recent whatever. I don't need numbers, and I don't want it. I would love to talk about your chili recipe.
Mhm.
That's what I would love to talk about. So just redirect it. And he's fine with it. He's like, now he'll say, like, oh, I know you. Yes, I don't watch the news. Thank you. But just reminding him because it's really my boundary. I'm having, a lovely day and I don't want to hear about all of these things that are not going, well with the world. That's not why I called. I called to connect, not to disconnect.
Mhm. The nice thing about you, Nedra, is you keep things simple and sweet, which is very helpful, and you have this really simple three-step process to boundary setting, where step 1 has to do with being clear and focusing on the solution, not the problem. Step 2 is saying what you need and want, and then step 3 is managing your discomfort.
Hmm.
Where do you see people getting the most tripped up in those 3 steps?
Repeat step one.
Be clear.
Step
Be
one.
clear. Step 1. Be
Step
clear.
one.
Yeah. Even
Step
even
one.
me saying all those 3 steps, I just made it complicated. I should have just started with step 1.
No, 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 no.
Yeah. Yeah.
We like to speak in problems, and maybe it's because we come from a history of speaking in parables and poetry and all of these things. We like to say a lot of stuff before we get to the nitty gritty of what we want or need. We will, I'm sorry you have to hear this. I don't mean it this way. And 5 minutes later, I don't like this. We still haven't stated a boundary. We haven't made a request. We have not set an expectation. We are still talking about how we feel about having to talk to them, what the problem is, how they hope they take it, all of these things that have nothing to do with setting the boundary. We're doing all of that as like this preamble almost.
Mhm.
Like, let me give you the preamble, and then I will tell you what I actually want. And by that time, people are like, what? What happened? it can be frustrating sometimes for people to even have to sit through all of this information for you to say to them, I would prefer if you don't come over my house when you're under the influence or something. It's like, okay, start there. Why are we going through all these other pieces, and we're talking about 5 years ago and this one time? What are you wanting right now? So if we can get to 1 to 2 sentences, that's amazing. And just say what we're looking for. The boundary can be the problem. But here's the thing, it needs to be a statement. It doesn't need to be a statement of the problem. Sometimes we will say, my problem with you is, and then we want the other person to figure out what should I do differently? They're doing it wrong. So they probably don't know what to do differently. You will have to step in and say, okay, this is what I need.
I love it. When you make the boundary the problem, then you get in circles of problem solving with the other person,
Mhm.
as opposed to giving them the solution of, "Yeah, I have the solution to the problem. It's my boundary."
Yes.
So
Yes. The
let's
solution is my boundary.
yeah, let's front
Yeah.
load that instead of getting in the the talked out of the boundary. I mean, I think that's what I
Mhm.
find. I'm easily talked out of something. That's part of being a porous boundary person, is that I can do this sometimes, maybe setting of a boundary, and then as soon as I've explained the whole reason why I'm setting the boundary, someone can talk me out of the boundary that I've just set, because
Mm.
obviously I'm not solid in it yet.
And they will give you ways to work around your boundaries. Sometimes when we're
Ugh,
not solid in our boundaries and we're giving people a bunch of information before we tell them what the boundary is, they have solved the issue that we thought we had.
oh yeah. Oh yeah, no, yes.
Yeah, it's like, whoa, now how did I get back into planning this bridal shower? Like,
Exactly. They figured out
because
my flight for me and all sorts of
Yeah,
things.
because you
Yeah,
never said, "I cannot plan the bridal shower." You probably said, "I have a lot on my plate. I don't know if I'll be able to do it on the 15th, blah, blah, blah." And they said, "Okay, cool. How about on the 17th?" And that'll be around the time after your birthday. Now you're back to where you don't want to be. It happens all the time because we don't get right to it. Earlier, my assistant was trying to put something on my calendar and she said, should we tell them April? I said, no, I don't want to do it. I don't want you to give them a future date, because if we say, oh, she's really busy right now, we'll check back in April. I don't want you to check back in April. I'm saying no.
that is so hard. You know, it's you have a gift for it, Nedra, and it is it is so hard. I see myself writing out the email, and then I have to pause and erase like 3/4 of the email and just get to the first sentence and the last sentence, right? Because all the other stuff is fluff to make the other person feel better. Feel better about what? Like, it
Mm,
actually it perpetuates this belief system that if I were to just be direct, that I'm harming someone by being direct, which is not true. I
hmm.
mean, maybe they don't like it, but there's not harm being done by setting a boundary.
What happens when April comes and they reach back out to me and I'm like, "Oh, no, not this week. Oh, no, not the next week. Oh, no. Can we look at May?" I just think that's that's not kind,
Yeah,
because what
yeah.
I'm doing is just like giving them this false hope of some possibility that something will happen, when in actuality it's like, no, it won't happen. I don't have the time for this sort of project. And it's not a not now thing, it's I don't even want to create the time. So
Mhm.
it is a no. It's a no this month and it'll be a no in 2 months. And I don't think it's fair to you to say, okay, well, maybe I could do it. I won't be able to do it. I can't see it being done in the foreseeable future. A few years ago, I stopped accepting new clients. I get this question all the time. When are you opening your waiting list? How long is your waiting list? I don't have a waiting list because I don't know when I'll be able to accept
Yeah,
clients.
yeah.
If I accept a client, it would literally be me calling my office to say, "Hey, if anybody calls and they want to see me today, I will accept one client." is
Taste the
that
lottery,
is
lucky day.
that is how that will happen. But
Yeah,
I don't want to put anybody on the list because I don't know. It could be
right.
years. It
Oh, and
right
being on that
now.
waiting list for Nedra, they won't go see another therapist because 'cause they're waiting
Yeah,
for you. Yeah,
yeah, I don't want you to wait. I want you to
yeah,
get therapy. So right
yeah.
now, it is a solid no. It is a no.
I have a supervisor that she's become a good friend of mine, and she has on her voicemail that she'll call you back in 48 hours. And, you know, at first I was like, 48 hours? That's kind of a long time to call someone back. And she basically said, if I tell them 24 and it takes me 25, they're in crisis mode. If they need to talk to someone before
Mm,
48 hours, they need to call someone else because it may be 25 hours or 26 hours. So I actually wanted to put a time that I knew that I could actually call someone back by. And it made me think about, boundaries around our technology use and our expectations around when someone's going to get back to us when they text us or they email us, or like if we could give ourselves, I'll get back to you in 48 hours or a week or whatever our personal boundary is around that, it would free us up so much and also help prevent the crises that happen when people
mm.
have an expectation of you that you are not meeting, yet you don't even know they have that expectation.
For sure. I do think with technology, there is this. What has happened now is people can contact me via email, DM, call my office, all of the, and sometimes people will do all of that. And they're like, yes, I'm sending you this DM because I sent you a email and I called your office. And I'm like, it's been 10 minutes. It's been 10 minutes. And now my assistant is calling and saying, this person called. I'm looking at the email. This has all happened in a span of 10 minutes. And there's this expectation like, why didn't you answer any of these? It's like, I was watching TV. Just like it's been 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But that is the world we live in, and that's not just with strangers, that's with our family, our friends, certainly work. There are all these things that are like this immediate attention is needed for this request right now, and every request is not a crisis, is not important, it doesn't need to be prioritized. I know that because I have about 25 email messages, and I would say 20 of them are not things that I need to respond to today.
Mhm. So I think it's good for us as we start to close up to talk about boundaries with technology use and boundaries with social media. And, you have obviously a massive following, but one of the things that I have learned from you has been around like curating feeds, getting rid of people that you follow that aren't, people that are who you want to have in your mind or on your, on your screen. Um, I think it's really lovely to see someone that has such a massive media presence setting such boundaries around integrity with use. And I'd love for you to share some of your ideas on that.
I think I follow around 84 people on social media. And I am constantly looking at that list because at different times I want to see different things. Some weeks I want to look at house plants. Some weeks I want to look at outdoor gardens. Some weeks I'm thinking about a vacation. And so when I stop thinking about those things, I unfollow the accounts. On Instagram, there's an overlapping of information. I don't need to look at 25 people talking about the same thing. I don't. And I don't want to have this endless scroll experience. So by following, a few people whose content I typically will look at most days, I think it's a good strategy to have. I do go look at, like, there are tons of accounts that I just kind of have saved that I'll go check out when I want to see their stuff. I'll go through, oh, this is what they posted all week. I'll like it, reshare it, whatever. But I don't always follow those accounts because I realize that my capacity is limited. And to even have a connection with people, I can't have personal connections with 2,000 people. I just can't. I don't have the time. I can have personal connections with 85.
Mhm.
I can
Yeah,
have, because for me, it's about connecting. So
right.
I do want to have some sort of relationships with people. And so I realize that I only have a limited amount of time per day to use Instagram. I only have a limited amount of time per day to respond to everything that someone is saying to me. And so, with that in mind, I try to curate my feed accordingly.
Yeah, it just this weekend while my poor son was home with me for the weekend, we cleaned out his dresser drawers. This is what you get to do instead of going to the baseball game. And it's it's like that. Like we were going through and I'm like, we got to take some of this stuff out because the drawer does not close. And you're
Mm,
not wearing the stuff at the back. And mom is not buying you a new pair of anything until we have room for it. And I think that that's what I've learned from you about the social media feed is like get whatever for me I'm like trying to keep it like 100. Like don't go to me on plus or minus however many. But if I'm just collecting more and more people, more and more information, one I am either lost in too much is taking up too much of my time or I'm just getting fed stuff that's not useful to
mhm,
me. And
mhm,
how do I at the end of the day, how do I wanna feel? How do I love the idea of connecting because ultimately, if you're using social media to connect, it doesn't have the same detrimental effect on your mental health than if you're using social media to compare. And so who are we looking at and why? And how does it actually I wanna find out who you're following with houseplants because I wanna do a better job with my houseplants.
Well,
And
actually, I'm not
yeah,
following anyone right now with houseplants, but I do
okay.
have some accounts that I constantly look at. I love Hilton Carter's. So
Mm,
I'll go look at his account, maybe every few weeks. And I'm like, oh, I'll catch up on his old post. I have his books. So there are certain things that I'll just browse when I have some extra time. I do put myself on a timer. And when I have extra time, that's when I'll get into my like, oh, look at me, a whole half hour today. I'll,
mhm.
I'll start my browsing, but I do try to be conscious of it because I have other things I like to do. I like to read. I like to go for walks. I like to hang out with my friends. So I don't want to spend all of my free time in that space.
Yeah, and you don't want all of us to spend our free time on that space either, even though you're a contributor to it.
Yes. Yes.
Um, yeah. So, set boundaries workbook goes along with the set boundaries find peace book. And you kind of buy what's good about the workbook is you take the principles from the book and you actually start to practice and apply them. And like you talked about earlier, unless you practice whatever cooking, you're not going to become a better cook. Unless you practice setting boundaries, you're not going to be better at setting boundaries. And that's what the
Hmm.
workbook offers us. It also helps you look at things in a little bit more granular way because it's not
Hmm.
just I'm a good boundary setter or I'm a bad boundary setter, but it's much more nuanced than that, depending on the relationship that you're in and the setting that you're in.
Yeah, that's why I was thinking of a scale earlier. I'm like, I should have created a scale because I'm somewhere between.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not good or bad. It's just, sometimes you just have your days.
Well, thank you, Nedra. Now we know how precious your time is, and for you to spend a whole hour of it with us is a treat. And I'm going to give you an extra 5 minutes here so you can have a little time before your girls get home to
Yay.
reorient to those sweethearts coming in your door. And I just really appreciate you taking the time with us today. It's a delight and honor to be with you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.